the great Sermon on the Mount, verse 41, if you're compelled to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Today I want to speak to you on going the extra mile. Over the centuries of time since Jesus taught that remarkable principle, hundreds of countries have used that particular motto to help them inspire their own people. Over the years, thousands of organizations, CEOs, Wall Street, have used that basic principle of the extra mile in order to motivate their companies and their employees. But over 2,000 years, tens of thousands of people have learned that great principle of going the extra mile. So today we're going to learn a very profound Christian principle of going the extra mile. This is going to take you into a new spiritual dimension if you follow exactly what the scripture actually teaches. There are 7 things that we learn from going the extra mile. It defines us in a remarkable way that perhaps no other portion of scripture quite defines us as far as an outward, overt experience that we have with other people. And so when we look at what the extra mile actually does, it motivates us to be more than what we ever thought that we could be. So let's get started and look at 7 principles that we gain, 7 truths that we gain when we learn to go the extra mile. Number 1 is this: the extra mile is where we actually begin, or where we start the journey. It's not in the first mile, because that is what would be required of us in any dimension, in any responsibility, in any duty. But where we actually begin to do greater things than these is when we go beyond that mile to the extra mile. And that's where we actually begin our spiritual journey. That's where we gain spiritual momentum. I would also suggest to you that when we begin this, the second mile is very inconvenient. The first mile may be inconvenient as well, but we take it upon ourselves nonetheless. But the second mile really yields itself to an inconvenience that we may or may not like. When I was in college, one of my jobs was a part-time janitor, and I was a janitor at Vanderbilt University Library. I worked for a man by the name of Sam, and Sam would come in occasionally and he would check my work. And I remember that when he would check it, I was a buffer. I buffed all the floors on the 6th floor of the Vanderbilt University Library. He would come in and he would go to each of the 4 corners of the room and he would check the 4 corners. One day I just asked him, I said, "Sir, why do you go to the corners first?" And here's what he told me. He said, "Tag, anybody I hire can do the center part of this room, but only those that go the extra mile will go to the corners to make sure they're just as clean." And I learned right there that what was expected of me was to go to the extra mile and make sure that the corners were taken care of just as well as the main room. It taught me something so profound, and that is simply that I didn't even begin my work until I went to the corners, because that's where the one who was supervising me looked first. Not only is it where we begin our journey, but secondly, it's what you do after you've done everything else. It's the person who stays late and comes early. It's the individual who decides that it's not about the time clock. It's not about where I want to be or somewhere else that I want to be. It's going that extra mile, and it's what I do afterwards that really gives me the greatest strength. I remind you of weightlifters, and all of us have probably seen people lifting weights on TV, or maybe you do it yourselves. But if you study weightlifters and those that really have learned the art of it, when they lift a weight, they may lift it 6, 8, or 10 times, whatever they have or chosen for that particular weight. But when they get to the maximum of 8, when they go to 8 and they feel that they can't lift it any further, that's where their muscle building actually starts. when they go to the 9th and 10th lift, it's what they have done after those last 2 lifts are what actually strengthen the muscle. And what we have to realize that in that simple illustration is exactly how you and I perform our spiritual duties. When we do it to the point of exhaustion, when we come to what we think is the end, it's what we do after that point, that really makes the significant difference in how we perform. The third thing that I've learned from this particular principle is that the extra mile is really what defines our success, or really how we see our success. If we see our success as coming to the end of what is required of us, and we drop it right there, that is as far as we're ever going to proceed to greatness. We're going to come to the end of our duty and we're going to stop. Back in the 1930s and 40s, there was a preacher by the name of John Rice. John Rice was not an extraordinary preacher, to say the least, but he went on to write about 60 or 70 books, had a great influence on American preachers. But back in the 30s and 40s, when he was being used by the Lord as an evangelist, he realized that he wasn't a great preacher. He wasn't a great speaker. He wasn't boring, but he certainly wasn't dynamic as others had been, like Billy Sunday and Billy Graham and many others like. But Dr. Rice learned a principle that maybe we need to learn today, and that is, he said, even though I was not a great preacher and I knew I wasn't a great preacher, I determined that I would work harder than anyone else so that I could make up for my lack of talent. And ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you that very thing makes a difference in our lives every single time. When I was in college, I was not a good high school student. I can tell you, I was not a believer. My mother was a school teacher. My dad was in higher education administration, and I was supposed to be a good student, but I hated to go to school. Well, I take that back. I didn't mind going. I didn't mind coming home. It was just staying there all day that I didn't like. But I was not a good student. I didn't want to do homework. I didn't carry books home. I panicked on the night before the test, found some way to get through the test, make enough grades to get out of high school. I would not follow my example again if I had it to do over. But when I went to college, God had called me to preach, and I said, the last thing I want to do is flunk out of college if I'm going to be a preacher. I can imagine putting that on my resume. Flunked out of college, don't know anything about the Bible, but hire me anyway. So I worked hard all the way through college and did quite well. But when I came to a particular subject that was not my forte, it was English grammar. Mrs. Hall, Geraldine Hall, was my professor. And she started at the first day of the first class of the first semester of that year. And she made this announcement. She said, if you will read an article, read a book, and do a short report on it, I will give you extra credit. And I'll give you extra credit, but you can't exceed more than 1 a week or 18 in a semester. Well, that first semester, every week I went to the library. I pulled out magazines and periodicals and books, and I found things that were relative, and I began to read them, and then I wrote a short report on them, and I turned them in every Friday. I did that for 18 straight months. At the end of the semester, I received an A. I would have gotten a B, but I wanted to go the extra mile to get the A. I wanted to graduate with honor. In order to do it, I needed that A. The second semester, I did exactly the very same thing. I went to the library, pulled out the periodicals and books, began reading of anything that was relevant, wrote a report on it, turned it in every Friday. At the end of that semester, I had turned in 18 reports. When my grade should have been a B, maybe I'm too optimistic, maybe it should have been a C, I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't want to ask. All I wanted was that extra credit. And at the end of that semester, I had an A. Then a strange thing happened that has been indelible on my mind ever since. She said, over the past year, I gave all of you an opportunity to do extra credit. And I thought, wow, I bet the whole class did this. And she talked about extra credit, going the extra mile. But she said over the last 36 weeks, there has only been one person who took that option. Now, she didn't mention me by name, but I know who that one person was that took the option. The extra mile made the difference for me. You see, the extra mile is what defines our success. And what defined my success is not how much grammar I knew, but what defined my success was willing to go the extra mile. The fourth thing that I want to draw to your attention is that when you and I go the extra mile, that's where we gain our greatest satisfaction. You know, there's not a lot of satisfaction when you walk away and say, I've done my duty. The greater satisfaction, in fact, the satisfaction that really has some meaning to us, is that when we have gone the extra mile and we have done what others have not expected and others have chosen not to do, but we chose to do it. And because we chose to do it, it brought to us a greater inner satisfaction and peace because we did what it would take to make everything a little bit better. Steve Woodruff was, in my estimation, one of the best trainers I've ever met of training professional salespeople. I took a course from him several years ago. It was a 40-hour course. We sat in class over in Hampton. He flew in once a week for 8 hours, and he trained people in salesmanship. And I'll never forget that he had an extraordinary presentation, but all of it was logical. All of it made common sense. But there was one thing that he said in that course that made all the world of difference for me. He said, you don't have to be a lot better than your competition to beat the competition. He said, all you have to be is a little bit better. If you think about it, what makes the difference in our spiritual growth is being a little bit better than we had been before. What makes the difference in your church is being a little bit better this year than you were last year. Being a little bit better, a little bit sharper, a little bit more excellence, a little bit more endeavor, a little bit more hard work. It just takes a little bit more incrementally that makes the difference in how successful. It defines our success and it gives us the greatest satisfaction. The fifth thing that I would say to you that I've gleaned from this great principle is that the extra mile really becomes who we are. Now listen carefully. The extra mile at some point ceases to be what you do. We go the extra mile, but we get into a habit of doing the extra mile. And what that does, that reflects not what we do, but now it reflects who we are. You stop and think about how that a church as a whole can become so much greater if only a few people become that extra miler whereby they say, this is not what we do on an occasional basis, but this is who we are. Years ago, I was pastoring a church, and we had so many needs because we were growing and growing and growing, and outreach was becoming a priority to us almost in every dimension. And because we were growing, it presented problems that we had not faced before. Growth always presents certain problems, and it meant that there were people that we needed and finances and resources that had to be accumulated. And one day after I had preached and given the invitation, I asked this of the congregation, several hundred people there. And I said, I'm looking for a few people who will go the extra mile, that in a time of need, I can call on you and you will always respond. I left it at that. Didn't make any further explanation. Very simple. Didn't expect but 3 or 4 people to show up. After we said the prayer and people started filing out of the building, I met a group of people right down to the left of the pulpit. There were about 25 or 30 people there. I looked at those people and I said, here's what I need. I need a minimum amount. I told them what the dollar sign was. I said, I need a minimum amount that you trust me, that when we face a need, I can come to you and you can help me to get this project accomplished for the glory of God and the furtherance of this church. All those people that day said they would. It was not only their service and their finances and their gifts and so forth, but they gave of themselves. We walked out of there that day. For the next few years, that same group of people that I called the extra milers, those are the people that carried our church not only to a growing church, but it took us beyond what our expectation had ever been, just because a few people decided that not only were they going to go the extra mile, but the extra miler was who they were, and they were going to use that as a ministry for the glory of God. It ended being one of the greatest success that we had ever had. The sixth thing that I would say about this principle of going the extra mile, it says so much about you and your character that is unexplainable and can't be placed into words. I know all of us probably like sports, or we watch some sporting event, or we have children or grandchildren that work and play in sports. And to me, it's not the best sport in the world. It's quite brutal, but I do like to see a good boxing match every once in a while. And Paul used the boxers as an illustration in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He also referred to it when he wrote to Timothy. But boxing is a skillful sport, and it takes a lot of effort, a lot of cardio, a lot of strength, a lot of technique, a lot of practice. But the best boxers in the world usually say this when they come out of the ring. They'll use a phrase, and I've heard it many, many times, but it's kind of the phrase that is used in the boxing industry and the boxing sport. And they will say this: I left it all in the ring. And what they mean by that is that I gave everything that I had. I gave more than I had. I gave all that I had and then some. I left everything, every ounce of energy and soul that I had. I left it in the ring and gave it all. You know, that's an amazing statement, isn't it? I gave it all. I left it all in the ring. What an amazing thing if we said in our service for Christ, I left it all in the ring, Lord. I gave it all I had and then some. When Paul commented to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, he said, when you gave, you not only gave to your power, but beyond your power. That's what the boxer said. He said, I gave to my power, but beyond my power. And Paul said, when you as Corinthians gave so that you could help those people going through the famine, you gave to your power, but beyond your power. That's what the widow did when she gave her 2 mites. She not only gave to her power, but beyond our power. If you and I give to the service of the Lord, not only do we give, we have to give to our power, but we have to give beyond our power. You see, what is so remarkable about the widow who gave her 2 mites is not the amount that she gave. What Jesus commented about was how much she had left over after she gave. She gave all that she had. She gave to her power and beyond her power. That little widow left it all in the ring. Amen. The last and final thing is this, and I hope that it will help us in some regard to understand this great principle, because this great principle, when we become that extra miler and it becomes our norm, it becomes who we are and not just what we do. But listen carefully, because this may be the greatest part of this principle. When you and I go the 2 miles, we realize that the first mile is our duty, but the second mile gives us the power of influence. And after all, that's what we want as individuals, is the power of influence. As a parent, I wanted the power of influence over my children so that I could direct them in the right way. As a pastor, I wanted to understand the power of influence so I could direct them on the right pathway to future success. As relationships with individuals, I want to have some level of influence because I know that that's how I'm going to help them. This past weekend, over 4th of July weekend, a friend of mine passed away. And immediately at his passing, I got a phone call from the chaplain of the police department. Just within moments after he passed away and the police came. I got a text from his daughter that I haven't seen in probably over 25 years. I got a text through Facebook from the granddaughter. I haven't seen that granddaughter, and I can't count how many years. But you know what? They remember growing up in church. They remember their pastor. And they remember their youth group. And when it came for crisis, they turned to the people who had influence on them. Does that make sense to you? It's the power of influence when they know that we go the second mile in all of our life. But it's not what we do. It's not what you do. It's not what you do. It's who you are. And when the second mile becomes who you are, it engages you in a power of influence to help individuals like you've never been able to help them before. And if we're going to help people, we can only help them not because of what we can give them, not because we can contribute to their well-being, but we can only help people by our influence because we influence them not with things of silver and gold, but by the powers of principle in order for them to live a life that is successful and powerful and takes them in a new dimension in their spiritual life. Well, let's look at two things. How do we encourage people to go the extra mile? Because after all, that's what I want to do for us today, is encourage us to take the second mile. There are two things that I would bear in mind. Number one is this. I want to go the extra mile because I know at the end of that second mile there is a reward that wouldn't be at the first. So if I go the first mile, there's no reward. If I go the second mile, I know there's a reward at the second. Understand something, that if you want the spiritual rewards, they're not at the end of the first mile. That's your duty. The reward that you're looking for, the greater satisfaction, is at the end of the second mile. And when you take that second mile, you'll see how it influences so many other people. I was preaching this sermon some time ago in another church, a little bit different, but nonetheless essentially the same thing. And a businessman was sitting in the congregation that day, and he went to the treasurer of the church, and he said, Pastor, we're coming up to the treasurer. He said, we're coming up close to Christmas time, and I know we're running behind in our budget. But he said, I want to challenge the church. I don't want to do it publicly. I just want to do it privately and secretly, and I'll let you handle it. He said, every person in the church that gives above their tithe between now and Christmas, it was about 3 months before Christmas, he said, I'll match it dollar for dollar. Over the next 3 months, they made that announcement. People began to give over and above their tithe. Treasurer kept track of it. At the end of the time, they had gone well over several thousands of dollars in their tithe. That businessman stepped forward and wrote a check and matched it. What he knew was going the extra mile not only motivated other people to do, but it rewarded him because he did also. Now listen carefully. I'm going to give you a principle very few people have ever heard of. I'm going to give it to you, and listen carefully. I'll prove it by the scripture. Whatever is my responsibility in the spiritual realm is also my responsibility to encourage other people to do so also. The Bible says this, let us not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. It is biblical principle that we are to assemble together as believers. True or false? True. Let us not forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but encouraging one another to do the same, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So the principle is, not only am I required to do something, but the requirement brings about me to motivate and encourage other people to do also. In our film strip, the father encouraged his son just by his example of influence. What did his son do? His son followed in suit, because there is the reward. The second thing that I would draw to our attention as far as what would bring about a sense of encouragement in our church, not only would there be a reward, but secondly, there would be a return. Now, you know well that in the last few years, the stock market has done incredibly well. And I hope the best for everyone here. Whatever you lost back in 2008, you got it back in the last few years, and you're back to at least square one. I don't know, but hopefully you're better off than you were. But here's what I know about investment. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a smart investor. I know there are a lot of people. I've just followed what people I trust have told me. But here's what I do know about investment. I'm not going to invest in anything that I don't believe with all of my heart is going to give me a return. If it doesn't bring a return, I don't want the investment. Now, a lot of people will try to get you to invest in their new trick or their new invention or whatever. And I would just suggest run as far away from that as you possibly can, because what you're looking for is a return on your investment. Let me give you an example. Over the years, we sent young people all over the world on mission trips. Those young people now have grown up, gotten married, have children, and their children are still writing me letters to donate to them to travel and go on mission trips. Because we gave to them individually and corporately when they were going on mission trips, because we believed that it was an investment that we would get a return on. My granddaughter just returned from a medical mission trip in Dominican Republic. And she said it just changed her. All of our children, my 3 children, grandchildren, have gone on mission trips because we know that investing brings a return on that investment. If we're going to put missionaries around the world, we have to train our young people to do so. Let me suggest something to you when you build your budget. Put in your budget several $1,000s to help your young people go to different places in the world to be a ministry and a mission trip. It's easy to go, and we've gone all these places, but it's easy to go out west to Indian reservations, to Mexico, to Canada, to Hungary, to Kosovo, to Moldova, to many other places in the world that are very open to young people coming and bringing the gospel message, to work in vacation Bible schools and church schools and street meetings and all the things that young people can do to attract other people. I'm telling you that when you, as a church and individuals, invest in that, there is a tremendous return on the investment. So we go the extra mile. Yes, I give to the church, but I'm going to go the extra mile because that extra mile is going to produce a massive return on a very simple investment. Let's look at one further thing, and then we'll call it a day. When you go the extra mile, it's going to say 3 things about you. And these 3 things are what's important to you, not only what it says about you, but think about it. When you go the extra mile, usually there is a recipient of the person receiving the benefit of the extra mile. So when you go the extra mile, not you, you'll get the satisfaction, the return on the investment, but the other person that you help in whatever way is also going to benefit from your second mile effort. So when you do that, it's going to say not only things about you, but it says things about that recipient. Number 1, it is this. What you're saying to another person when you go the extra mile is, you are important to me. In a world where everyone is being neglected for whatever reasons, everyone is facing some type of abuse in our world. Read the paper and you'll find that children, young people, all kinds of people, women and men, are being abused in such horrific ways. They look and wonder, does anyone think I am, as a person, important? And when we go the extra mile, we're saying to that individual, you are important to me. Number 2, it tells that individual that they are worth my investment. I'm willing to help and go the extra mile because I look at you and I see you as an individual, and I'm willing to go the extra mile because you are worth it. And when we put a certain amount of worth, as Jesus puts worth on people, we will see people through a different prism than we've ever seen them before. But we have to see people as being worth the investment. And if we don't think they're worth it, then we'll barely go the first mile, much less the second. And so we put value on people. The third thing it says is that we're interested in their success. We want people to succeed, and we want them to succeed as quickly as they possibly can. So many difficult problems that people are facing right now, storms in their life. Some of those storms may seem like breezes to some people, but they're hurricanes to others. When people look at us, they're looking for two things. If you'll remember these two things as a Christian, then I would say everything else in your Christian life will fall into its proper place. But you must understand these two. When unbelieving people, and by the way, you have a community full of them, just looking at what's going on in Gloucester County right now, you've got an opportunity for evangelism to evangelize, listen carefully to me, hundreds of people under the age of 20. And we can do it. You have to believe you can do it. You have to know that the people who are under 20, many of them who are on drugs and alcohol and are facing more circumstances that they've ever faced in broken homes, etc. What we have to say to that individual is they are worth something to us and worth going the extra mile. But before we do, we have to send a very strong message to our community, and this is the message. You can trust us. You can trust us. You can trust us with your children. You can trust us that we'll put the resources in it necessary to give them the very best. You can trust us that we'll be there to help them, to encourage them, to direct them. You can trust us. That young couple coming into your church have in their arms one of the most precious things in their life, and that's their child. And what they want to know from Union Baptist Church is, can I trust you? Can I trust that pastor? Can I trust that individual? Can I trust those Sunday school teachers? Can I trust them, or are they going to turn on me and be backbiters and criticize me because of the way I look, the tattoos on my arm, the way I dress, or the way I wear my hair? Because if that's what we're interested in, we'll never help them. What they want to know is, can I trust you people? Can I trust you? Can I be vulnerable and be part of your fellowship? Can I trust you that you'll love me? Because if I can't trust you, I won't come. Number two, not only do they have to trust us, listen carefully, they've got to know we care about them. You know, you can tell people you love them, but it's meaningless. People have tried to understand Jesus Christ from a historical standpoint, from a secular viewpoint. They look at Jesus Christ and they see that he drew thousands of people in his crowds. When he fed 5,000, there were probably more than 15,000 people in attendance. When John the Baptist was preaching, the Bible says that all of Judea came out to hear it. That's an enormous crowd because there were well over 50,000 people in Jerusalem alone. People have always asked and wondered how Jesus could gain so much momentum and gain so many crowds. Well, we know two of the hints. One of them is Jesus spoke to them as one of having authority versus that of the Pharisees, who were cold, dry, legalistic, and indifferent, much like churches in our day. But the second thing that they understood about Jesus by the tone of his voice and by the care that he gave them, they looked at Jesus Christ and they saw a man who truly cared about them. And when we look at people that we truly care about them, we will change them, but more importantly, they will change us. I don't know of any person that ever with an open heart went on a temporary mission assignment to South America. It was always my custom that if I went overseas somewhere to a mission field, I took a layman with me because I wanted them to see what was going on in the mission field. But when they came back, people would ask us, how did you help those people? And the quest was never how much I could help them, but what they would do in changing me and my perspective of world evangelism and getting people to Christ. It's what they did in me. I'll close with this story. I was in South America, Venezuela, the southern part of Venezuela, the savannas, to the poorest tribe, they say, in the Western Hemisphere. There are some poor tribes in the Eastern Hemisphere in Africa, but this was one of the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, a tribe called the Pume Indians. And we were walking into the village. We flew in a little Piper Cub airplane, 3 of us, and we went over to the missionary's house, and he said, let's walk down to the village. This whole village had become converted to Christ. Whole village, over 250, 300 people, had all been converted to Christ. They had church every night at 6 o'clock. Now, they had no watches, but they watched the sun. And at a certain time, the whole village would meet at the chief's hut. And they would sing and pray and preach, and people would give testimonies and give messages of how God had helped them and how they had learned spiritual truths. So we were walking into the village. And as we came into the village, a small group came out to meet us, and there was a tall Indian. Indians are not very tall. They're usually, the Pumes are about maybe 5 feet, maybe 5'2" would be high. But this gentleman was probably 5'8", 5'10", which was pretty tall for a Pume Indian. And when he came to me, he had a big smile on his face, and he walked up to us, and he put his hand out like this.